Welcome back to another one of our studies in Philippians. Today we're looking at Philippians 2:19 through 24. So follow along as I read. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me. And I'm confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. Well, Paul has just talked about being poured out and talked about his death. And in a way, this little section is almost kind of like a will, in the sense that what does he have to give to people that he loves? He loves the Philippians. We'll come back to this later on about what he wants to give them. He wants to share something with them. Well, what he has are friends, and friends that they know and that they also have a relationship with. And so he says, first of all, we'll talk about Timothy this week and Epaphroditus next week. But he talks about Timothy. Now, wherever you are in the world, everybody's been affected by COVID. And there is the dreadful disease itself. I really don't know anybody who hasn't known someone who has died from COVID, certainly more people who have been sickened by COVID. All of us have been inconvenienced by COVID, wearing masks, which is something now that we've gotten kind of used to, but and though some people stubbornly refuse to do so, as well as refuse to get vaccinated, they fall prey to the disease, and that's a risk I guess they're willing to take. Never mind. But all of us had experienced some parts of it. And in parts of the world right now, there are massive shutdowns because of the Omicron variation and the Delta variation that's still running around, plus the old-fashioned COVID. And so there is this ongoing problem that we're having with COVID. And with the shutdowns, it becomes a rather dreadful thing, not just because of the disease, but because we are isolated from each other. We were told to avoid large gatherings of people, which includes going to church or to our core. And if we do go, we're told to keep our distance. We're told to kind of pay attention to who's there in case there's an outbreak. And there's all these kinds of things. Now, fortunately, in our day and age, we have computers, we have Zoom and so on. So we at least have some kind of contact where we look at the other individual. But I know that one of the most difficult things, even for people who are introverts, has been this idea of being cut off from other people and from people they love. Well, you think about this sacrifice then that Paul is making. Here he is in prison in a city far from his home. And when it's time to give something to the dear people in Philippi, he says to you, he says to them, I hope in the Lord to send Timothy to you soon. And then he goes on to describe Timothy himself. He says, I have no one else like him. Now, when he says that, the term in Greek is isopsychos, which means having the same soul. And we sometimes say in English, soulmate. And we usually talk about someone that we fall in love with, marry, and so on. But there's also this strong kinship between same gender friends, that they're just the very best of friends. They understand each other completely. They can complete each other's sentences. When they're together, there's just they click and they understand. And certainly that's the kind of relationship Paul had with Timothy. And we wonder how Timothy experienced that. I mean, here he was with the most prominent Christian in the world at this time, even more than the original disciples, and who has gone throughout all the world, has written all these books and had this tremendous use by God to establish Christianity. And Timothy, we gather, is kind of a little bit on the shy side. Remember that Paul, even though he refused to do it for other things, he circumcised Timothy because Timothy was kind of afraid to be among the Jews He had a Jewish mother, but a Gentile father, and had been was circumcised because I guess he was a little sensitive to criticism. And then later on, Paul tells him when he writes to Timothy that, God will give him a calm heart and mind. And so we have this idea that Timothy may be a little bit on the shy side. And here's this giant that he's with, his mentor, his father figure. In fact, Paul even says that. He says that as a son with a father, he has served me. So there's this almost a paternal relationship Paul has with him. Really is paternal, and so when Paul is talking about being poured out, part of that being poured out was to send Timothy to them, this one who means so very much to him, to share in fellowship with the people in Philippi, and to return to him and bring news about the Philippians. Again, of course, in these days that any kind of mail, if it even could reach people, would have traveled quite slowly. And really, it was unreliable. So, the personal messenger was the best way to get that information. And so Paul hopes to get a return on this. But again, his willingness to sacrifice that fellowship that he has with Timothy. One of the wonderful things that happens to us as Christians, not just that we have a relationship with Christ, but we have these relationships with each other. And the closest relationships I've had with people are ones who share my commitment and belief in Christ. I've had non-Christian friends. I still have a few non-Christian friends. But for the most part, the deep relationships I have are with other believers. And we don't always talk about faith things. We talk about this, that, and the other, sports teams and the weather and all this kind of thing. But there is always this unconscious and often unspoken understanding that God is the most important thing in our lives, that we owe him all glory for our salvation, and that we're on another wavelength. And if we might be talking about our sports teams one moment, we can flip over and talk about the things of the Lord and talk about them at great depth because of that relationship we have with each other. And again, God gives us those kinds of people, and God gave Timothy to Paul and Paul to Timothy. And so this is a wonderful thing. And you think maybe for a moment about those kinds of friends you've had. Maybe someone who lives in the same city, maybe somebody who lives a great distance away. But whenever you're with them, you pick up right where you left off, and it's just a wonderful thing. Sometimes they're in your own family. You might have a brother or sister, or you may have that. Some people they say their spouses are their best friends. I think that's wonderful and certainly is true. But sometimes we have another friend beyond that. Anyway, the point is that God gives us these relationships, and a lot of times they're forged in our common service for the Lord. And that's what Paul talks about here. He said, he does not look out just for his own interests, but those of Jesus Christ, which was, of course, the people. The things of the Lord was the care of the Lord's people. And so they were together in their service, and that made them even closer, have a closer bond than he would have with them otherwise. And again, you think about these folks, people you've labored next to, and maybe that's where the friendship was formed, was in doing something together in the Lord, and out of that came this rich fellowship. Anyway, so Paul talks about that, and realizing, and let's just think with a moment. We've been lonely because of COVID. We've been cut off because of COVID. And if you had the chance where things loosened up and you could be with people again, how wonderful that felt. And think of the sacrifice Paul is making now by sending Timothy back. Again, we don't want to just skip by that. To give up this one with whom he has this wonderful relationship and know he's going to be gone, not for a couple of days, but for weeks and months. Even while he knows that while Timothy is gone, he may be executed. He may die and never see him again. And so what a sacrifice he is making for the Philippians to send Timothy to him. And yet we see, even at the end of this, after talking about, Paul says, He says, and I'm confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. Now, isn't it interesting? He's just been talking about his death, about being poured out. He talks about, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. And then he says, I hope to see you soon. Well, we can understand that. And again, Paul shows how human Paul was, like us. His emotions were probably all over the place. As he faced this idea of his death, he probably had moments that said, I'm ready to die for the Lord. And other days he said, a few more days wouldn't be bad. I wouldn't mind going out there and being among the people again and being back in my ministry again and so on. The Lord knows us in all the phases of our emotions. He loves us in all those kinds of things. And wherever we might be and wherever you might be right now, the Lord knows what you're feeling and how you're feeling. And he knows that you sometimes go back and forth, and he loves us despite that. And the point is, just like with Paul, we just say, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. Wherever I am, whether I live or die, whatever happens, I give myself fully to the Lord without reservation for whatever he might have. God bless you.